The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the August 8th, 2013 edition of the RAD Live question and answer session. My name is Will Levy. I am hosting here at headquarters. We're also joined on the phone by Greg Byrne and Kathleen Foster, who will help with their insights. Thank you for those joining again from previous weeks, and welcome to all new listeners. So just a reminder, if you have questions during this session, use the GoToMeeting portal to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, and the presenter will unmute you after we say your name so you can ask your question live. A lot of folks last week submitted questions in writing, and it actually became very difficult for us to keep up with them because it shows up very small on our end. So we strongly encourage you, if you've got questions during this session, to raise your hand and we'll answer them live and verbally. So today's session, we're just going to quickly walk through the RAD inventory assessment tool. Again, this is sort of a continuation of our basics courses. We're not going to spend too much time on it, and mostly and quickly get to your questions, whatever they may be, whether on the inventory assessment tool, multi-phase awards, portfolio awards, or other. Okay, the inventory assessment tool does two main things, and we'll walk through each of them. The most important thing it does is it tells every housing authority and anyone else who wants to know what the RAD Section 8 rents would be on any given public housing property in the nation. So this is a vital starting point in thinking through RAD. And of course, this is old news for the returning listeners. The rents are based on calculations made in 2012 of your operating capital and tenant rents received. And these rents will continue to be honored for any applications we receive in calendar year 2013. I want to stress that. The second thing the RAD inventory assessment tool does, and this is really the bulk of the tool, is it helps you to do an initial financial feasibility test of your projects under RAD. So we will get to that as well. First things, where is the tool? So on our website, www.hud.gov/rad, from the main web page, click on Planning Tools. And then from that page will take you to the Planning Tools page. And the second item there is the RAD Inventory Assessment Tool, right under the also very useful RAD Conversion Guide for Public Housing Agencies, and right above the also very useful RAD Physical Conditions Assessment. A lot of useful stuff on this page. So you've clicked that link, you've downloaded the tool, it's on your desktop, so let's go into the tool. So the tool first opens with an instructions tab that, of course, explains a lot of the background of the tool, what its purpose is, where the data is coming from, and other useful information. Once you've read through the instructions tab, which I'm sure you'll do thoroughly, move to the Global Inputs tab. This is a tab that asks for some very basic information. The very first thing it asks for is the PHA that you're looking to assess. And I don't know if the Chicopee Housing Authority in Massachusetts is on the line. If you are, I apologize. If you're not, I also apologize, but I'm going to use you as an example in this presentation. So I've looked up that the Chicopee Housing Authority PHA code is MA008. Click Enter, and find out that the Chicopee Housing Authority has 3 properties. Next thing I'm going to do is click on Populate Data for all properties for this PHA. A macro runs behind the scenes, populates the next tab called Inventory Overview. I click OK to this pop-up box, and it actually returns me then to the Global Inputs tab. Here in the Global Inputs tab, it just asks me for a couple more pieces of basic information just to get things started. First is first mortgage financing terms. I'm going to assume that that we're going to be looking at FHA financing for this for these three properties if needed. So I'm going to enter in some financing term for interest rate 4.5%, amortization term 35 years, mortgage insurance premium 0.45, and the debt service coverage ratio of 1.2. The 1.2 debt service coverage ratio is a little higher than FHA can even go lower, but just to provide a little cushion here. Type of rental assistance contract. This actually doesn't have a huge impact on the tool, but just to get things started, I'm going to enter PBRA. And then finally, it asks for an assumption about initial operating expenses. There's a few options here. You can enter no global input and enter them property by property in the next page. You can enter you can use a standard market estimate if across all properties you just want to start with a common number. You can do so there. Or what I'm going to do is I'm going to go 95% of formula expenses. What this number is in public housing and the operating fund, projects are funded by a formula that estimates the expenses, how much it costs to operate a project in that area. And this formula is applied each year with an inflation factor. And so in this tool, we populate the formula expenses at 95%, so assuming that some efficiencies are met.
Kathleen thinks she can't hear. I'm wondering if anybody else has the same problem.
Sure. Just want to do a sound check with folks. If anybody else can't
Sure, I'll do it.
If anybody's having difficulty with the sound or with the visual, please let us know however possible. Either send a note to rad@hud.gov, raise your hand.
She went on and stopped.
How do I do this?
Okay.
One second, folks, as we try to work out a small technical glitch.
Kathy Dorgan?
Kathy Dorgan, you're on the line. Can you hear us?
Okay. Is it muted? Is the phone on mute?
No. I'll try redialing it or something.
Wait, do that. Hit that again. Okay. All right. Thank you. I'll let her know.
Okay, sorry about that, folks. Would somebody mind raising their hand to confirm that they can hear? Okay, Arthur, you're on the air.
Welcome to Verizon Wireless. The wireless customer you called is not available at this time. Please try your call again later. Announcement 1, switch 170-3.
Hello?
Welcome to Verizon Wireless. The wireless customer you called is not available at this time. Please try your call again later. Announcement 1, switch 170-3.
Hello?
Okay, am I back on?
Arthur Knoll, still unmuted.
Okay, sorry about that again. Arthur Knoll, you are unmuted. You're on the air. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank goodness. Thank you. We apologize profusely. I will continue with the presentation. Could you put Arthur back on? Arthur, did you hear the first part of the presentation where I talked to you a PowerPoint?
No, couldn't hear it on the PowerPoint, but I dialed in on the phone.
Okay. And over the phone, were you able to hear from the beginning of the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. I will proceed then. And you're right now looking at the inventory assessment tool, the Excel sheet?
Yes.
Great. Perfect. Thank you, Arthur, for your help. We will proceed. So, as I was saying, we will begin using with as an operating expense assumption 95% of formula expenses, which is a formula amount. It's not a perfect estimate of what any given property will operate at or does operate at, but it's a decent starting estimate. So now I'm going to move into the inventory overview tool. From the inventory overview tool, we see the 3 properties populated. Cabot Manor Apartments, 150-unit, looks like a family property. Memorial Apartments, 157-unit elderly site. And Canterbury, 76-unit, probably also an elderly site. And as I said at the top of the presentation, one of the most important things the tool does is it tells you what the rent's for, what the Section 8 contract rents would be if these properties converted. So for Cabot Manor, the weighted rent would be $775 per unit per month. For Memorial Apartment, $674, and for Canterbury, $733. Okay, so before I get into the financials for each of these properties, I want to answer one very, very common question we get about these rents. Some people will say, well, so this 150-unit Cabot Manor Apartments is actually composed of a few different buildings, and I'm only interested in converting some of them. So how would I get what the rent would be if I were doing a partial conversion at a site and converting, let's say, 2 of the buildings? So I'm going to scroll down to row 58 through 65, where it tells me the actual unit breakdown of these 150 units. And let's say I only wanted to convert the 2 bedrooms and the 3-bedroom units. The 1 bedrooms were a separate building that housed disabled tenants. So just converting the 2s and the 3s. I'm going to scroll back to the top to see what the impact on rents. Now the rents are $813. What was once $775 per unit per month is now $813. So that's just one example. So if you're considering doing a partial conversion, that's just a very quick way of checking your rents. Another area I want to point you to, besides this row on where you actually change the unit counts, if you scroll further down to rows 118 through 125, you'll see the actual contract rent schedule, where it tells you what the rents are, what the rent schedule would be for each bedroom size. So in this case, a 2-bedroom is worth $729, a 3 is $873, and the 4 is $1,013. So I'm going to scroll back up and change my assumption back so that it's, those 24 units are actually included in the conversion as well. You'll see there are a few other sections in this tool that first it explains how we constructed the contract rent. As many of you know, it's based on the public housing subsidy received in 2012 plus the tenant rents. We then take that current funding amount and test it against the applicable rent caps in project-based vouchers or project-based rental assistance. In here, we made some estimates. What we do know, we do know the FMR is applicable to every project pretty well. What we don't know are reasonable rents. We put in an estimate here, but reasonable rents, or what is similar to what the comparable market rent is. Reasonable rents are a term used in the project-based voucher program. These are very imprecise numbers, and if your current funding rents are anywhere near this, then it would be wise to go in and find out what the actual reasonable rents are or would be for this project, because you don't want to inadvertently reduce the subsidy at a site. Similarly, for utility allowances, we don't have very good data on this by project, and so we put in estimates based on what we could deduce from each project. Okay, so that's just on the rents. Now we can switch to the question about financing. You're looking at these three projects, and this PHA is sold on RAD, wants to convert, trying to figure out, do the numbers work? So for the first project, Cabot Manor Apartments has $775 RAD contract rent. That results in gross potential rents of almost $1.4 million, or $9,300 per unit. After taking out that vacancy loss and bad debt loss and adding in some other income, and the tool begins with some assumptions, but you can change them as needed. You have an effective gross income of $8,770 per unit. The 95% of formula expenses for this project is $7,553. We enter in a plug for replacement reserves of $500 per unit per year. And that results in net operating income of $718 per unit per year. According to the financing terms entered in the Global Inputs tab, that could support debt service of $598 per unit per year, which supports debt of almost $10,000 per unit. And then the rest is cash flow for the owner. So the question is, the two biggest variables to consider are, one, what does the project need in work? And two, the operating expenses make all the difference. What are the actual operating expenses? In this case, the PHA says, well, actually, I don't operate at $7,553 a unit. I operate $6,500 a unit. So they're going to change that. They're going to change that number. So now we scroll down and find out that this could support a debt of $24,000 a unit, or $3,610,000. However, the first big unknown is, or from our perspective anyway, the PHA should have a much better understanding of it, is what does the project need? I'm going to assume here, I'm going to make some assumptions on each of these projects. I'm going to assume that this project actually needs $35,000 per unit in work, or $5.25 million. So with debt alone, this isn't cutting it. It's going to have to fill a decent gap. I'll come back to that in a second. Kathleen Foster will help me out with that. Next property we're going to look at is Memorial Apartments, 157 unit. Again, weighted average bedroom 0.69, so it looks like it's mostly efficiencies in one-bedroom units. Working through the pro forma, we're going to change the operating expenses to what they actually are, $5,600 per unit, and find a net operating income of $1,500. Now, what this property actually needs, though, is very little. The PHA used all of the ARA funds that it received, or a whole lot of it, to address the needs of this site. So this property only needs $3,000 per unit. Very little. Does it need to take out debt at all? Probably not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll right down here and assume it's not going to take out debt. I'm going to zero out the debt service coverage ratio. So this project is cash flowing almost $243,000 per year. And under RAD, cash flow is unrestricted, defederalized funds. It's just income for the agency with which to do other PHA or other emission-related activity within the PHA's charter. The $3,000 per unit need, it's planning to fill with operating reserves, which every public housing project has at least 4 to 6 months of operating reserves. And in this case, that just about comes out to $3,000 per unit, which it's going to use to address the minor needs at the site. So that's a slam dunk deal. They're converting this property, putting it on a more streamlined Section 8 platform, collecting this cash flow moving forward, and not taking out any debt here. Last site, Canterbury Arms apartment, 76 unit, 1 bedroom. Looks like it's all 1 bedrooms, and a RAD rent of $733 per unit. Again, I'm going to go to the operating expenses, and in this case, it's $6,000 per unit, which would allow it to raise over $1.8 million in debt. This property actually needs only $1.14 million in debt, or about $15,000 per unit. So here's a property that's completely viable just with FHA, probably 223F financing to do the $15,000 a unit work, cover any other expenses, like a consultant, any fees, plug up initial deposits or replacement reserves, take out a small developer fee, and this property is a pretty clean example as well. So we're going to come back to Cabot Manor Apartments, which, as I explained, needs or could raise in debt $24,000 in unit, but we know needs $35,000 units. So now I'm going to turn to Kathleen Foster to talk through how a PHA would think about using tax credits in this case.
Okay, thanks, Will. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. I'm having a little trouble with my visual, but I've been through the numbers enough times that I think we'll get through it just fine. So what we're going to do when you come to a situation where you can't finance enough with just debt, which is the case of Cabot Manor, to cover what your actual rehab needs are, then you're going to want to drop down closer to the bottom of the tool spreadsheet to the sources and uses section. And you'll see right away that the first mortgage self-populates from the calculation you did above. So that number drops down directly. And then where I usually go next is to go to the lines of the budget that constitute the uses for your development budget. So the first line in the uses is a line called acquisition. And this might feel strange to you because, you know, the PHA already owns the property, so what in the world is the acquisition cost about? Well, actually, if you've done a tax credit deal before, you know that what you're doing is you're selling these units, not the land underneath them, but just the units themselves, into a limited liability corporation for purposes of generating the tax credit. So what you get to do is estimate what the appraised value of the units are today. And there's pretty much agreement among the attorneys in the affordable housing industry that you can estimate that number based on the market value of the units today. So not the value of the units restricted to public housing, but the value of the units if they were out on the market and people with choices you know, could come to them, and so the appraisal would be based on what would people pay in rent without the HUD restrictions. So we've seen numbers in this category of anywhere from $10,000 a unit to $150,000 a unit, depending on where you are in the country. So we've been using, just as an estimate, about $25,000 a unit, just as an estimate for the acquisition cost. So if you want to fill in that number, I'm going to tell you what the formulas are for those of you that are comfortable with Excel, because if you fill out Cabot Manor with formulas instead of with actual numbers, you will be able to copy over to the next, to the subsequent deal. And that might not be a big deal if you've only got 3 amps, but if you have 15 amps, it's worth doing it by formula. So the formula would be, you're going to do G12, which is the number of units, times $25,000. And that's going to give you your acquisition amount. So will you tell me when you're ready to keep going, because I can't see what you're...
Oh, sure. Sorry, Kathleen. Yes, I've entered it, and it's $3.925 million.
Okay. So then the next line is your rehabilitation or construction cost. And again, using the formula, you're going to pick up G12, which is the number of units in Cabot Manor, times, and Will, did we decide it was 40,000 or 45? What's our number?
Yeah, let's go with 40,000.
Okay, so that's going to be 40,000. Okay, then I think the next number, hang on just a second, let me get my, the next number are relocation costs. And typically, we don't put in anything for relocation costs, and here's why. With RAD, your Section 8 contract will start to fund when you close on your construction financing. So even though there's going to be a period of time where some units might be empty to be able to help with expediting the rehab, you'll get the full value. In this case, I think Cabot Manor was $775 a unit a month. You'll start getting that as soon as the construction financing closes. And what most PHAs have found is that with that level of funding, they can also cover any relocation costs that they need to do in terms of moving families around a complex, or some PHAs are going out and master leasing units to temporarily relocate families. So really that number, what that number should be for relocation depends on what you come up with as the housing authority. So you should estimate what your costs are, then estimate how much income is going to come in from your RAD Section 8 contract, and see if that in fact covers all your estimated relocation costs. And in some cases there's an excess which you can use as an additional source of financing for the deal. Or if there's a shortfall and you think your relocation costs are going to be greater than what will be covered by the RAD rent, then you'd want to put that number, or whatever that difference is, into this line item. But in most cases, PHAs are finding that the funding of the HAP contract at the close of construction is sufficient to cover their relocation costs. Then the next line item is professional fees. These vary so wildly with the type of deal, where you are in the country, the number of units, et cetera. We estimated them at $250,000. So that estimate really should be based on experience in your local marketplace. And I do want to say that in this deal, we're looking at doing 4% tax credit. And there are always additional costs with 4% tax credits that have to do with issuing bonds and bond opinions and selling the bonds in the marketplace, et cetera. And so just so you know that in the tax credit estimator, we've deducted about an additional $500,000 from your tax credit proceeds to reflect those additional costs related to bonds. So in fact, when you look at that 250 number for professional fees, if you thought of it as professional fees plus bond costs, et cetera, really what you have in your budget is $250,000 plus the $500,000 that we took out when we did the LIHTC estimator, which is in the gray highlighted portion that's actually below the sources and uses page. And if you have questions about that, please ask us and we can come back to it when we get to the Q&A. Then for loan fees and costs, what I typically would do is go to the construction cost line. Sorry?
Kathleen, I'm sorry. Do you want me to enter $250,000 for professional fees?
Yeah, just put in $250,000.
Okay.
And I just want people to know that there's actually more than that built into the calculation of the equity, which we'll get to in a second. But 250 is what should be in the actual uses line.
Okay, it's in. Thanks.
Then on loan fees and costs, typically I would go up to the construction cost line just above and multiply that line times 1% plus your interest rate. So your interest rate that Will gave you on the global input page was 4.95 when you added the rate and the MIP. So your overall interest rate is 4.95. So in this line, you're going to go up to the construction cost line, and then you're going to multiply that times 0.0595. So in essence, this is saying that you're paying 1 point on the loan, which is typical for an origination fee, and this is covering your construction costs, assuming a 24-month construction period. So this is a fairly big number, and obviously, if you don't have this many units and you think you can get the construction done in less time, then you should make the adjustment to your construction interest number on this line. So if you thought you could do the project in 12 months instead of 24 months, you divide the calculation I just gave you by 2. Are you with me so far, Will?
Yep. Thanks, Kathleen.
Okay, cool. Then we go down to reserves. And the formula for reserves that's pretty much universally accepted in the affordable housing industry is that you need to have 6 months of operating expenses and debt service as a reserve. Okay, so that formula is going to be, you're going to do equals and then parens G25 plus G30, close the parens, divided by 2. So that's the operating expenses and the debt service from up above divided by 2, so that you get 6 months of those instead of a full year. We all right so far, Will?
Yep.
Okay. So now I'm going to drop down to the developer fee, and this is not a precise calculation, but it's a good ballpark, which is really what we're giving you in the sources and uses calculations. So here I would go up and pick up the number in the construction cost cell, and multiply it by 0.15. Because on a tax credit deal, as far as the RAD rules are concerned, you can take a 15% developer fee.
Okay, thanks.
And we assumed then that there is no payoff of outstanding debt, but if you have, just remember, if you have either an EPC or a CFFP loan, you need to call us and we need to talk you through how to pay those off as part of the financing. Okay, so now Will, tell me what your total uses are showing.
So you have, we started off with total uses of $6.2 million in construction, and you were good enough to add another $6 million or so. So now we're at $12.2 million. Okay, so then now we're going to go back up to the sources and see whether we have enough money to do this project. And I'm going to guess that we don't. So the first thing we're going to do is fill in the tax credit amount. So we're going to go to the line that's about 10 lines down from the first mortgage loan number, where it says LIHTC, 4% with bonds or 9%. And Will is going to go down into the tax credit estimator and pick up the line that is at the 4% credits, and we're going to assume that this particular deal is in a census tract that is eligible for 130% of the credit amount. So if you've done a LIHTC deal before, you know that certain census tracts are eligible for a boost in the tax credits. And often it's because they're in high poverty areas, and we've found that it is more likely than not
that the public housing projects are in a high poverty area. So we tend to assume that you're going to get the 130% census tract boost, but that's something you're going to want to look up the address and look up whether you, in fact, are eligible for that boost. But for purposes of the numbers today, we're going to assume that you are.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to guess that there's still not enough money there to cover all the uses.
That's correct. We're at $6.8 million.
So then, okay, so then the next thing you're going to do is go down to the line that says seller takes back financing, which is 2 lines down from where you enter the LIHTC information. And here's where you are going to just go down and assume that even though the PHA got paid, I think we said it was $25,000 a unit for putting the units into the limited liability corporation. In this particular case, we need the housing authority to lend that money back to the LLC. So in theory, what happened was the PHA transferred the units into the LLC. The LLC hypothetically paid the housing authority for the units, but then the housing authority had to provide seller take-back financing to the deal so that the deal could work. So Will's going to go down and pick up that acquisition number and put it in seller take-back financing.
Okay.
Okay, now if you still have a gap, the next place you can look is deferred developer fee. And what you can do is you can defer up to 50% of the developer fee and have that be paid as a priority out of cash flow. So in this case, just so you keep it as a formula, you would go down and pick up the developer fee and divide it by 2 in that line. Now, obviously, your developer if you have a developer partner, they will not be happy with deferring developer fee, and so they may come back to you as a housing authority and say, well, gee, don't you have any extra capital fund money lying around or replacement housing factor funds, et cetera, et cetera. And if you're the developer by yourself, you too would like to get that developer fee because it is unrestricted, non-federal money. So if you have other money that you can put in so that you don't have to defer the developer fee, that's obviously preferable. But sometimes you do need to defer so that you can close the gaps and make the project work. So Will, how are we doing?
We have about $1 million gap. The total uses are 12.2 million, and the total sources are 11.2 million.
Okay, so then what you know then is that you have a gap, and there's some things that you might be able to do to help close that gap. An easy one is if you happen to have, if you're in a jurisdiction where there's excess home or CDBG money, you can now use home money in RAD conversions. Under the old rules, you couldn't use home money in a public housing deal, but you can use it for a RAD conversion. Or if you have replacement housing factor funds, which historically have been required to be used on new construction only, those actually can be used on a RAD rehab or any other sources you may have. And there's some things that you'll want to tweak. For example, if you're in a hot tax credit market, it may be that the investor would pay more than 85 cents on the dollar, which is the assumption that I think is built into the LIHTC estimator. So if they, in fact, will pay 95 cents on the dollar, that's going to come pretty close to closing your gap. You may be able to
just change it to 95 cents, and let's see what happens. Just, in fact, we are very close now. Yeah.
Okay, and so you might be able to further close that gap by, you might go back and look at your operating expenses again and see if maybe you can shave $5 or $10 a unit a month, because that will allow you to borrow more and probably close that gap. So that's kind of the exercise that you go through. You'll also want to squeeze the folks that are providing you professional advice. You know, if you have several of these to do, you might be able to negotiate attorney's fees with a cap. You remember we said earlier that when we built the model, we took out an additional $500,000 on the 4% deals from the calculation of equity to cover the cost of bond issuance. Well, if the PHA is a bond issuer, you may in fact find that you don't need $500,000 to cover those costs. So I think between, really sharpening pencils and sort of shaving your third-party costs, you should be able to get close to closing the gap on the project with 4% tax credit financing.
Great. And certainly another thing we often see is housing authorities using just their capital fund grants or the operating reserves that exist at the property to fill gaps of this size.
And for certainly, if you have either local or state housing trust fund money, you will meet, housing authorities doing these conversions will meet all the requirements for getting points for affordable housing preservation. So don't think that, oh, I'm a PHA, so I'm not going to be able to get those points. I mean, those programs already exist, and, you will pretty consistently fall within scoring range where there are local funds available for preservation. You'd also want to consider the Affordable Housing Program of the Federal Home Loan Bank. Many PHAs are able to get between $500,000 and $1 million every year for various preservation projects. So that's the 4%, and the advantage of the 4% is that in some cases it's available on a rolling application basis, meaning that you don't have to wait until the annual application date. You can just get your application together and put it in, and the HFA will review applications as they come in. And in virtually all states, with the exception of New York, there is excess private activity bond cap available. So there really it should not be difficult at all to get 4% credits. It's really almost non-competitive because there's so much excess private activity bond cap available. So unlike the 9% credits, the 4% are much more readily accessible.
Thanks, Kathleen. That was very helpful.
Okay.
So at this point, why don't we turn to questions? So if folks have questions about the tool, about financing options, or about anything else, we're going to open up the line. And starting with Bonnie. Bonnie, you're on the air.
Can we go back over the developer fee, the deferred developer fee, the formula that was used for that?
Sure. Kathleen, you still on? You want to talk through it?
Yeah, I'm still on. And what you would do is go down, you'd start with your cursor in the deferred developer fee. Well, I guess I've created, on yours, Will, I took out one of the other lines and typed in deferred developer fee.
Yep. I did.
Okay, so you're going to go to that line, and you're just going to do an equals, and then go down and pick up the developer fee down in the uses, and then divide the developer fee by 2. So divide it by 2. And the reason for that is that most tax credit investors will not allow you to defer more than 50% of the developer fee, because the developer fee is an item that goes in tax credit basis and therefore must actually be paid. And they're always worried. They'll look at the cash flow of the project to make sure that the deferred developer fee can actually be paid in the first 10 years of project operation.
Does that help, Bonnie?
Yes.
Great. Let's see who else we have. Any other questions? Catherine Wilford? Okay, we'll go to the next. John Lazar.
How are you?
John.
Hello.
Hey, John, you're on the air.
How are you doing? You had mentioned filling the remaining gap with possibly AHP funds, and you said that some RAD projects are getting the points for preserving existing affordable housing. Now, were those RAD projects that were converting with expiring contracts, or do you think that would apply to any RAD contract conversion?
So you're asking, is that just for those rent, SUF, RAP, and mod rehab projects with expiring contracts, or is it also public housing projects that are converting through RAD? Kathleen, do you have a sense? Are you finding public housing projects are scoring well on those as well?
Well, I think we're early in the process to know, how successful everybody's going to be in going after AHP. So here's what you need to do. There are several regional headquarters for the Federal Home Loan Bank. So, for example, in the Southeast, the regional headquarters is Atlanta. And every regional headquarters gets to decide what their priorities are. So for a while, before 2008, everybody's priority was single-family home ownership, and so it was really hard to get AHP funds for rental projects of any kind. Since that time, really some of the focus has gone away from single-family home ownership and back to the importance of preserving rental housing. And so really the key is, just like it is with your HFA qualified allocation plan, the key is getting a hold of your Federal Home Loan Bank regional scoring priorities and seeing where preservation fits within their scoring priorities. And also remembering that, like with the QAP, you can influence what scoring priorities are, because they do respond to public pressure for or public suggestions to where their priorities should be.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But preservation has been, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, preservation has been pretty important in a number of the Federal Home Loan Bank regions, and I guess the only point I'm trying to make is, don't think that just because you are now public housing that you wouldn't qualify for preservation points. I mean, the whole point of RAD is to support preservation of these assets that serve very low-income families. So anywhere there are preservation points for grant funding, that's worth looking into in terms of filling gaps on any of your RAD projects.
Yeah, I guess our concern was that being that the contracts aren't expiring, they're just converting whether or not the bank, but I suppose it's up to the scoring people at the Federal Home Loan Bank.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Juan Olvera, welcome back.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
The question we have a Section 504 BCA. We still have about 2 years to complete the rehab of the units in the common areas. We have been allocating capital funds to do this work. How this is going? Can we roll this into the RAD?
So I'm just going to rephrase the question so that for other people sort of can catch up. You're saying you've got a voluntary compliance agreement because you have an ADA non-compliance issue that you're working on amending, and you're wondering if through the RAD conversion, if you do the repairs necessary to come into 504 compliance, would that work, and would that satisfy the agreement?
Kind of, but because right now we're under a time limit and we're talking about over 300 units, and we have been allocating capital funds to do this work. Could we roll those capital funds into the RAD to continue the work once we start doing the rehab of all the units?
Yeah, this is Cheryl Tanninga. I think the first thing you'd want to do, a lot of the BCAs I've seen have a specific schedule for targeting a certain number of units that must be completed and compliant by certain dates. And I suspect you have that in your VCA as well?
That's correct.
Okay. Is the Housing Authority so far on schedule and in compliance with that VCA?
Yes.
Okay, that's a good thing. The third thing is if by rolling some of the remaining costs into RAD, would that impact your schedule at all?
Well, no, because if we're going to do major rehab, why spend now capital funds to do just Section 504, and then later we have to come back and rehab the rest of the units or do major work on those units? So the question is, why waste those funds now? Can we kind of put on hold the BCA and then use those funds to complement the funding?
Sure, you can. I would caution you to make sure that Housing Authority and you coordinate with FHEO, because if in fact rolling that into your RAD and there's a delay in the, whenever the RAD construction, post-closing, whenever the construction starts there, if that impacts your schedule, you're going to want to talk with FHEO and talk about, if necessary, modifying the VCA to accommodate, that additional influx of funds, so that you can do more complete rehabilitation while bringing the units into compliance, if that makes sense. You just need to, you want to manage it so that the Housing Authority can stay within compliance with the VCA.
Yeah, but if we're planning on doing a portfolio conversion of all our units, so if we do that, we'll have to comply with Section 504.
Right. But all I'm saying is that if you have a certain schedule that you need to meet in your VCA, you need to make sure that throughout your planning for RAD and your portfolio conversion that you are still in compliance with that schedule, and if not, you need to talk with FHEO.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I would add just one small thing. This is Kathleen. If you're thinking about doing 4% bonds and tax credits with any of the deals that you're doing, currently doing the improvements on, you'll want to go ahead and talk to bond legal counsel, and they will want to draft up what's called an inducement resolution for your board to pass, because in many states you need to have that in place, and then any rehab that you do after the bond inducement resolution is passed can be included in your tax credit basis. So, so you really could keep going with some of the improvements that you're doing now, and you'd still be able to count those in your tax credit basis when you were doing that transaction. So if you're thinking about doing 4% credits, you'll want to talk to bond counsel sooner rather than later.
Okay. Yeah. No, we need to do 4% in order to cover the gap, the financing gap that we have.
Okay. Well, yeah. So then you'll want to just talk to your bond legal counsel. Ask them, do you need to have a bond inducement resolution in place? And I think they'll probably say yes. And the sooner you can get that in place, the more of the costs that you're currently expending can be included in the refinance.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Let's see. Nicole, you're unmuted. You're on the air.
All right. I'm wondering, under the RAD inventory assessment tool, I have scattered site units, but they're not within one in particular AMP. So how would you, I guess, extrapolate just the units that you would like to run the inventory assessment tool on? So within each AMP, there may be properties that are not scattered sites as well.
Okay, so you've got scattered sites, and they are included in multiple AMPs.
Right, along with other properties, right? So like each AMP is going to have some scattered and have some non-scattered, of course. But we're only looking at this. We only want to assess the scattered sites.
Sure. So you would, and you're only looking to assess the scattered sites. So in for each amp with the scattered site units, you'd go to rows 58 through 65, and you'd enter in just the unit numbers for scattered site units. So if we're showing that now on the screen, I think the 150 unit building or amp. Let's say that 4 of these, just 4, were scattered site units, and they were all the 4-bedroom units. I'd erase I'd zero out the values for 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units.
Okay, got it. Wonderful.
And you'd see what the rents would be for those 4 units. And you could, in the application, you would do it the same way. You apply by amp, and so if you only need to apply for 4 units, or in this case, sorry, 6 units, then that's how you would submit the application.
Okay, so if we submitted the application and let's say every amp had maybe a few units, do you still make it as one, or do you put them together, or you have to go, is it separate applications for each amp?
Yeah, so it's technically it's going to depend a little bit on your case. Certainly any units, just from a very technical legal basis, we need documentation that you're applying for specific units from an amp. So every unit that you're applying for that comes from a separate amp, there needs to be a separate application. However, what some housing authorities are doing is generally outside of the scattered site context is, let's say they've got 2 amps, but they're right next to each other, and they're going to do one 4% deal. If it's going to be one financing transaction, then we have special instructions for how to represent all of that, the entire financing in one application, and have all these other applications basically be blank and just represent the units.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So we can work with you on that if you like.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Nicole. Okay, other questions? Ron Law.
Hi, Will.
Hey, Ron.
We have a project, and we've received a chap for it. It was a tax credit project before it was a RAD project. And at the time that we put in the tax credit application, we got approval from HUD to commit housing authority operating and capital funds to the project. But with the requirement that those funds be expended by the end of the current fiscal year, so we're talking September 30th. It's touch and go whether we're going to close by then, and my understanding is that you will waive this deadline for expending the funds. Am I correct there?
Yeah, so in general cases, the capital funds that housing authorities have obligation and expenditure deadlines, and in the recent revision to the RAD notice, we've said we'll extend those obligations if you're committing them towards a RAD deal. It's hard to tell in this case. Is this a sort of a special deal you've got with HUD? In which case we'll have to sort of work with it on a one-off and talk separately, or is this really just you were planning to put capital funds in? You've got an upcoming expenditure deadline or obligation deadline, and you're just not sure if you're going to hit it.
I think the original obligation deadline had already been extended for the tax credit deal, so that's what I believe the situation to be. So, yeah, the question really is then, what do we need to do to apply for this waiver?
Sure. So generally, what you need to do to apply for a waiver of the obligation expenditure of public housing funds would be to email your transaction manager. For those on the line who are not yet RAD awardees, once you have an application that's approved, you're assigned to a transaction manager. So you'd email your transaction manager as well as Jeff Riddell of the in the Office of Capital Investments. I'm sorry, capital investments in HUD here, submitting that request. And it's pretty run-of-the-mill for us to approve them.
Okay. Okay, so we need to be contacting our transaction manager then.
Yes.
And Jeff is, let me make sure I got it spelled right.
It's the last name is R-I-D-D-E-L-L.
R-I-D-D-E-L-L. And, okay, I should be able to look up his email address on the...
And I believe there's an FAQ on this, Ron, so you should be able to find it through the resource desk.
Okay, great.
Okay, Ronald Wong.
Hi, yes, thank you. My question has to do with, I know in the previous iteration of RAD there was a DOFA date of October 2002 which was eliminated. And my question has to do with standards of distress. What, if any, are being applied to mixed finance deals that are post that October 2002?
Sure. So when I take one step back on your question, which is that the original notice said it had to be placed in service before October 2002 if you're a HOPE 6 site to be eligible for RAD. The revised notice says, one, makes that 10-year-old date dynamic. So you have to be at least 10 years, more than 10 years old at the date of application. So by now it's 2003. If you're over 10 years old, no problem, you can come in. Second is if the Housing Authority is submitting all of its projects for conversion under RAD, then and it doesn't matter what how old the project is, it's eligible to apply. And then third, we've got a carve-out for HOPE 6 projects that have a demonstrated history of some financial distress. I don't have the notice in front of me, but I believe it lays out there what you would need to demonstrate to show us that the property would really needs to convert through RAD in order to remain viable.
Yeah, well, this is Kathleen. I mean, essentially, what we're looking for is 2 out of 3 of the last 3 years of audited financials need to show financial distress, meaning that the public housing units are not covering their portion of the operating expenses, and or that one of the partners, including the Housing Authority, is having to put their financial resources into the deal to make the operation side work. But that's all, it's all spelled out very precisely in the revised notice.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Amy Martinez.
Hello. I have a question for you guys about when you were discussing the bond. Sorry, let me grab my notes here real quick. It was on the part when sorry, I don't have it down. Let me see. When you guys were talking, when Kathleen was talking about the bond inducement resolution, is that only for under the 504 requirements of having stuff done, or would that be under anything that we had to have done or that we were currently doing prior to our chat?
Yeah, that's a good question. It would be under anything. So anytime that you're going to do some work, or you might even have some work ongoing now at a project before you heard about RAD.
Right.
It varies a little from state to state, but you'll want to contact local bond counsel and find out if you should get your board to pass a bond inducement resolution so that you can count any expense, any capital improvements that you've made from the time of the bond inducement resolution to the time of closing in your 4% tax credit basis.
Okay.
So if you're thinking about
doing
bonds, yeah, if you're thinking about doing bonds at all, you should get a good local bond attorney. They will really save you a lot of time and energy. because it's complicated.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Douglas Carlson. Oh, excuse me. We'll come back to you, Doug. Let's see. Bonnie, you're back.
Yes. We have a question on an SRO. Will HUD allow us to use a D4 mortgage to finance a mod rehab for SROs for homeless individuals?
So this is a project that's supported by a McKinney-Vento SRO mod rehab contract.
Correct. Yes.
So if the question is whether that project is eligible for RAD, right now it's not. It cannot convert to a long-term Section 8 contract through RAD at this point. We've asked Congress for authority to, and we're optimistic that in the next year or so we'll be able to, but right now we have no authority to convert that project. If you're asking a question about the existing rules of the SRO mod rehab, I think that's outside of our expertise.
Okay. I thought that it was, well, it said they wouldn't, but you could get headquarters approval. No?
No, right now we have no statutory authority to convert McKinney SRO mod rehabs.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, Doug, you're back on.
Yes, I'm sorry I cut you off. I have a question relating to the sources and uses. Acquisition costs. Now I'm going to assume that whatever the value of my project is, I'm going to be doing the seller take-back loan. So in establishing that acquisition cost, is it required that I have an appraisal on my properties, or can I somehow determine value without spending significant amounts of money in MAI appraisals?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is Kathleen. Unfortunately, I don't know of any housing finance agencies that will let you take the acquisition tax credit without an MAI appraisal. So it's not a RAD question per se. It's really a question to your housing finance agency. So you can certainly ask them, but typically either they will require that, or the investor who is taking the credit will require that.
That's what I thought the answer was. So the next part B is the appropriate timing on getting that, recognizing that entities only accept appraisals for a given period of time.
Right.
Is it in my best interest to initiate the appraisals now prior to my RAD application, or should I wait on that until I'm closer to actually doing the bond deal? And
I would definitely wait. I would definitely wait for two reasons, maybe three reasons. One is if you're thinking about doing RAD, we can't stress enough that you need to get your application in. You don't need to have solved every problem. You can make an estimate based on a informal conversation with an appraiser about what you think the number might be, and include that in your application.
Okay.
And then the second, issue would be is that often lenders will not accept appraisals done in someone else's behalf. So you might go ahead and order an MII appraisal and have to pay for it, and then your investor or your lender will come in and say, oh, sorry, that wasn't our guy who did the appraisal, so we're going to do it again, and you'll get to pay for it again. So I would really urge you to wait until you've got your CHAP in hand and you're moving forward with an investor and a lender, and make sure that they approve whoever does it so that you don't end up paying for it twice.
That's great. Thank you for your advice on that.
Uh-huh.
Sorry, does anyone else have questions? Do folks have other questions they want to raise their hand and ask out loud? Not seeing any pop up, so I'm going to turn right now to one we received in writing, which was, can you go through how the model determines what the rents are for each property and how we can sort of double check those numbers? Well, the contract rents, I'll talk through this as other people formulate their other questions, but for every project, we added up what they were getting in 2012 through the operating funds, through tenant rents, and from the capital funds. The methodology is described in detail in the instructions tab, so you can go through. But what we find is a lot of people say, well, I want to go through these numbers myself and double check them. And 99% of the time, they come out with the same number that we did. And when they don't, it's it's a very strange circumstance. So I would, you are welcome to double check the numbers, but we came up with the methodology and performed the same calculation for every public housing project. So I'd stress that you can skip that step and go towards trying to make the deals work. So any other questions? Any other hands raised? We like questions verbally. Okay, well, if there is nothing else, we will wind this broadcast down. I'll talk slowly in case there are any other questions. Oh, there is a couple. Here we go. Linda Bridge.
Yes,
hi, Linda.
Hi, thanks. My question was, I've heard in some of the other calls how you can pool some properties, and if needed, you can increase rents on one property and decrease them on another as long as the net, there's no increase in the net amount. So in this example, could the rents be increased at Cabot Manor and decreased on Memorial to help fill the gap?
That's exactly right. That's a very good point. Thank you for raising that. Let's scroll to the top of this and just think through how this would work. So Cabot Manor, actually let's change the units back to Cabot Manor to 150. So if you scroll down to, in that section, enter in the green cells, enter in
2050.
No, one cell down, two cells down. Yeah, so enter 24, 58, 62. Okay, so we're going to go back to the top. Thanks. And you see Cabot Manor has rents of $775 and Memorial Apartment has rents of $674. But as I walk through this hypothetical, Memorial was fine. It needed very little work, didn't need to take out any debt, and 674 was actually much more than it needed, while Cabot Manor had some gaps to fill, and the PHA was trying to avoid putting its own money into the deal. In fact, wanted to make sure it maybe earn some developer fee out of it. So these two projects could be submitted together as a bundle, such that the gross potential rents in this case, which are right now 1.395 for Cabot Manor and 1.270 for Memorial Apartments, totaling about 2.6 million or so. As long 2.65 million, they could restructure the rents such that the gross potential rents across the two projects are still 2.65 million, and raising the Cabot Manor rents in such a way to make the deal viable. Very soon we'll be putting out a worksheet to help PHAs sort of play with the numbers in that way. And that would be a helpful tool when they're considering just these cases and when they're submitting their applications. Thanks, Linda, for the comment. Did you have any other questions on that concept?
Just in follow-up, is there a way to do that on this worksheet?
No, not right now. I wonder if perhaps as we develop the rent bundling worksheet is just about done and should be out, we might consider ways to try to incorporate it into here. But I wouldn't expect that to be ready for another few weeks or months. So you'll probably have to work on them separately for now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Linda. Okay, other questions? Let's see. Debbie Gumbel.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm wondering, when you're putting in these formulas on the spreadsheet, where are you getting those from?
From the brilliance of Kathleen Foster, who's done these deals 100 times over and knows how to, you know, and this is the formulas she's using are estimates, right, Kathleen? They're sort of
yeah. I mean, really, it's just intended to help you get a sense of, you know, is there a prayer that this deal works, you know, just as debt only, or if I know I can get 4% credit, so is there a way that I can make it work just with 4%, or do I really, is my only hope going with 9%? So I'm not at all suggesting that these are numbers that you can take to the bank. I'm just saying that it's a way to tell, just from a ballpark perspective, whether this works. And then, of course, you would want to, before you actually apply for credit, you'd want to actually get quotes for all these numbers and make sure that they were as accurate as you could get them.
My question is really the formulas that you were putting in so that it would automatically calculate.
Right.
For the sources and uses?
The function formulas, yeah.
Well, you know, really all I was doing was, in some cases where the formula depended on the number of units, I was just picking up cell number 12 from up above, which is the number of units. So I'm thinking maybe that would it help if we put out, maybe I'll just put it on RAD resource.
Would love that. That would be absolutely.
Formulas we're using.
Yes, that would be fantastic.
Okay, great.
Very helpful.
But know that you know they are just estimates, and that
sure.
You will need to get, you know, real numbers whenever you really get serious about putting the financing together.
Right. I just thought it would be helpful to know the actual formulas that you were using here, because you were going kind of fast. I couldn't get them all in.
Oh, okay, no problem.
It'd be great if you could post them or mail them or whatever you do.
Yeah, I'll put them on radresource.net. And I'll
wonderful. Thank you so much.
That says something like how are the formulas calculated, and then the answer will be in there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Michelle. Michelle Greening, you're on the air.
Hi, this is actually Steve.
Oh.
I got a question for you. Could you go back to the acquisition and the construction cost and just kind of go over that once more of where we're acquiring the numbers that we would put in there, especially like the acquisition, you have improvements only, and so I'm just still not quite understanding everything as far as where we get where we're pulling that big number from. Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Basically, what you're going to do on the acquisition part is that you're going to talk to. You're not going to go ahead and get an MII appraisal, because we know from the prior question that you'll probably end up having to pay for it twice if you get it yourself. So you probably know some appraisers in your community, and you're just going to say, gee, if I have this property and it was not subject to any HUD restrictions, what rents do you think I could get? And then based on that, they'll be able to give you an estimate of about how much per unit, or of about how much the project would appraise for. And then, you know, usually a portion of that is related to the underlying land value, and a portion of that is related to the value of the units themselves. And sort of a rule of thumb that people use, and it's, you know, only as valid as the rule of thumb is that, you know, in an appraisal, typically the land is worth 10% of the overall value, and the units are worth 90%. Now, you know, if you're on San Francisco Bay, I would say that formula is probably wrong. But, you know, in a normal situation, that's usually the rule of thumb that people use. And the reason you're not going to include the land in your acquisition price is that there's no reason, you don't get any benefit from that. That the land is a non-basis eligible item, and so you don't get any tax credits from putting your land into the LLC. And as the PHA, if you hold on to the land, if you continue to own the land, you can lease it to the LLC on a very long-term lease, typically 50 to 80 years long. But what that means is that at the end of the tax credit period, you still own the land. So it really gives you more leverage at the end of the tax credit period to make sure that you get ownership of the units in the long run after the investor is done taking their benefits. So you're going to want to hold on to the land, and all you're doing is transferring the units themselves, the improvements, into the limited liability corporation. And you're going to get an estimate of the value of those units by talking informally to a local appraiser or two and getting a sense of what could those units rent for if they were not subject to any HUD restrictions. Does that make more sense?
Yes.
In general, you know, we've seen, in general, the number that we've been using that seems to be borne out by most properties is that the units are worth somewhere between $25,000 and $35,000 a unit. Again, okay. You know, totally. And I just talked to someone this morning who said he had some units in Hoboken that appraised at $160,000 a unit. Okay, well, you know, you can see downtown Manhattan from his site. So, you know, that's a different situation and different market rents than would be typical in most public housing projects.
Okay. Now, on the construction cost part, I've already started working on an analysis and then I was reading some of it, and you're looking for a cost per unit eventually, of rehab and everything else. So in this, when we're just making this to use it as an assessment, do you, I know 100% accuracy would be perfect, but do you want to take your cost a little bit high or maybe a little bit low? Where do you want to go with this, as long as this is for all practical purposes a guess at this point without doing the whole assessment? Where do you want to go with this? Do you want to add in contingencies on top of it? Where do you want to see that construction cost come in at?
Well, you know, it's a good question, and you know, it's obviously going to vary. But I would think of it as the number that you think is going to be the amount on your construction contract. So it would include the builder's overhead and profit, or if you're doing it yourself, you know, whatever your overhead and profit would be. And typically in a rehab, you know, people like to see either in the construction contract or outside of it, you know, a 3 to 7% contingency. So, so I guess it's really kind of, it's really kind of a function of it's always nice to have the number be a little bit bigger because then you've got more room. But if by making the number bigger, you're making it so the project has gaps that you can't fill, well, you know, maybe that's not the right strategy. The best strategy really is to come in based on your best guess, and then your uncertainty is going to be eliminated almost immediately because you're going to have to do that RAD physical conditions assessment, and that's going to tell you for sure what your rehab costs are.
Right, but you're not doing that big assessment until after you know for sure you have a project. So for this initial, you're not filling all that out. So
that's right. That's right. Go ahead.
Where I'm going with this, without getting so that you spend hundreds of man hours between my own time and an architect, an engineer, consultants, and everybody else, and then we send it the application in, and it comes back, no, we're not going to let you do this. So we've got a whole bunch of money invested into something now, other than using it for the GPNA later. We've got a document that, you know, we spend a lot of money on that has no practical purpose.
Well, I would say that for putting in the application for RAD, that it's fine to use whatever assessment was in your last PNA. You know how we all had to do it, you know, every 5 years you have to do a new PNA? Use that number. If you know for sure the number's higher than that because you know of some additional things that have happened since the PNA went in, well, you might want to go ahead and add them. But you do not need to get an engineer or architects or anybody else's report to fill out the application and file for to get your CHAP. You already know probably off the top of your head what the ballpark for your rehab number. And so the whole idea of applying the application is it's not like a tax credit application where you pretty much know, you know, what you're doing and you pretty much know, you have a pretty good idea what your numbers are. It's really a preliminary assessment so that you know you've got the commitment for the half in hand when you go to put the rest of your financing together. So I would say don't spend a lot of money putting the application together, but I get your point that it is unavoidable. You do have to spend the money on the RAD PCA. So that money, it's true, you will have to spend before you know for sure whether you've got a project that's going to work.
Okay.
I don't know, Will, would you say that differently? I mean, Will?
It's perfect.
Okay.
Okay. I'm sorry, Steve, is there something else?
Nope, I said thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Let's see who else we have. Stephen Rothfeld. Stephen, you there?
Yes.
Hey, Stephen.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
Good. A couple of questions just for reinforcement purposes. Could you go over where replacement housing factor funds would come in? I thought before you had indicated that there would be an add-on to the contract amounts, to the contract rents for the 5-year term. Is that correct?
So there's two.
How do they flow in?
Right. So there's two potential uses for replacement housing factor funds.
Okay.
Sorry, it's not two potential uses. There are two kinds of uses. There's stuff you've already gotten, so stuff you got last year, stuff that you're about to get this year,
right.
That you're accumulating in order, but you haven't yet put to use. And then there's the replacement housing factor that you're anticipating getting in future years.
That's correct,
So
yes.
for stuff that you've accumulated but not yet spent, you can put that into the capital sources of a RAD deal. For replacement housing factor funds that you're anticipating getting in 2014 and beyond, there's a way to collateralize that into the RAD rent and boost up the RAD rent. And we'll also be putting out a little further guidance on how to do that calculation shortly.
Okay. And to confirm another point that you said during this session, you said that home funds could be used for both new and rehab?
No, I think that was me, and I think what I said was that replacement housing factor funds used to have to be used only for new construction.
Okay,
but now they can be used as a capital source for rehab or new construction in RAD.
Okay. New and Rehab. Okay. And then with respect to home funds.
I don't know the rules for home funds well enough. Will, are you? No. You could send us that. You could send us that question to radresource.net, and we can make sure, you know, as an FAQ, and we'll make sure we get an answer to it.
That sounds great. And I guess just one final request: could you put both slides and the tapes of these sessions on the website?
Yeah, we're working on that. There's a week and a half delay or so, but the session from the session from 2 weeks ago is about to be posted.
Excellent.
The session from last week will go up sometime next week, and then so there's a little bit of a delay, but yes, they'll be up, both a recording and a transcript on YouTube.
Outstanding. Outstanding. That's it then. Thank you.
Sure. See if there are any other questions. Oh, Margaret Moran.
Hello.
Hey, Margaret.
Hey, so I just wanted to double check and make sure I heard right that the appraisals on the acquisition value is an unrestricted value with no affordability restrictions?
That is, I mean, that issue is, that's not really a RAD question. It's really a question that your HFA and your investor have to be comfortable with. But as far as the RAD team is concerned, that would be our answer. I mean, you know, that is the answer that others in the industry have gotten when they've been doing, you know, there have been a lot of capital fund financing deals done with 4% credits. And that theory on appraisals is accepted in the tax credit industries, that you can use for 4% credits on a public housing project. You can use, you can use an appraisal based on the property without the HUD restrictions.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's a really important point because a lot of the deals are going to have a tough time working without 4% credit. And so, you know, as far as the industry goes, we are certainly hoping that continues to be the industry standard, that, you know, the appraisal is based on an appraised value without being subject to HUD restrictions.
Great.
Very good. Thank you.
So it's past 3:30, and so we're just going to take a few more questions. Next up, we've got, and folks start signing up. We won't be offended. Next up, we have Locke or Look. You're on the air. Nope. Okay. So we'll move on to the next questioner, Len Henry. We're taking you off mute. Len?
Hello.
Hey, Len.
I have a question back on the RHF funds. Are those eligible for the preparation costs of the application and the PCA, or you have to wait till it's a development deal?
No, you can use up to $100,000 of public housing funds on pre-development expenses without asking us for any special permission. The RAD notice allows that.
So even for the RHF funds?
Yeah. There may be some, not 100% familiar, but I'm pretty sure you have to declare what you intend to use RHF for. And so if you're using it for this purpose, in whatever documentation you're keeping track of your RHF uses, just make that note. But it's an eligible use.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll go back to Look. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. Last name D-O-A-N. You're on the air and unmuted. Okay. See if there's anyone else. Debbie, another question?
I have another question.
Sure.
On the, did I misunderstand when she mentioned the PCA? That should be done before the app submission?
No, it's not required. The PCA doesn't need to be done until after your application has been approved. Once your application is approved, we award you a CHAP, a commitment to enter into a HAP, which lays out milestones.
Okay.
One of the milestones is after 90 days, you need to submit to us a RAD physical conditions assessment.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the clarification.
I would add just one quick thing to that is the PCAs are kind of like appraisals in that lenders and investors like to use their own people or at least have input into, the PCA process. So it's a good idea if, once you get your CHAP, to contact your lenders and you can let them enter into the agreement with the PCA provider or at least make sure that they're going to accept the report from the PCA provider.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, one more from Alicia Hashaw. Hey, Alicia.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
I have two questions. One, I'm working on the RAD application form, and I got to where it has the usage and the sources, and my use and source dollar amounts agree, but I'm getting an error that's telling me that it's a faulty error, but the dollar amounts are exactly the same. But if I go in and put an extra dollar under the usage, that changed the total, but it brings it in balance.
So it must be a matter of decimal places or something like that.
Yeah, it's a rounding error somewhere.
Yeah, I tried to do like 0.05 to see, and it didn't do it. So would that be, because it tells me that I can't submit it with this faulty error. So should I make $1 more?
Yep.
Okay. And another question. When you ask for financing letters of interest and intent for a 9% low-income housing tax credit, what's the difference between a financing letter of interest / intent for the 9% low-income tax credit and a letter from a credit issuing authority?
Sure. So I'm sorry, Kathy, you want to take that one?
Sure. For 9% credits, what we need to see is that you've read the qualified allocation plan in your state and that you think you will score high enough on that qualified allocation plan that you are a good candidate for tax credits. And initially we had hoped that the housing finance agencies would provide letters to RAD applicants, saying that, they thought they were a good candidate for tax credits. So far, we haven't found a single HFA that is willing to do that. So, so what you really need to do is put together your own scoring sheet that shows how your project would score and submit that to us. And in addition to that, you need a letter from a tax credit investor saying that they have looked at your numbers and that, however that's worded, that they think the deal's feasible and that they'd be interested in it.
Right. And that's just the letter of intent is what the investor needs to sign, and that's just the template form that's the second or third workbook in the worksheet in the application.
Okay. Now we applied for under the low income housing tax credit. We did the federal and the state. So which one are you requiring us to submit to you from the equity investor? Both?
Will your equity investor do both the federal and the state, or do you have a separate investor?
We have two separate investors.
Two separate investors. I'd say if you already know who they are, I'd go ahead and get letters from both of them.
Okay, will do.
Okay. All right, so any other questions before we sign off? Looks like, yes, a few more. Joyce Floyd. Joyce, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Once you submit your application, is there an actual approval letter that you'll get that says that your application has been accepted? And if so, what's the turnaround time on that?
Yeah, so when you submit your application to RAD applications at HUD.gov, first you'll get an automatic reply that says, thanks, we've received it. And then our review team performs its review, and it's typically within 30 days. We approve of your application and provide you a chat.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Joyce. Anyone else? Let's see. Michael Dokes?
No, I should be muted.
Oh, excuse me. Your hand's raised. Okay, there it is. Okay. One last try for Locke. Locke, are you there? I apologize for butchering your name. Okay. Okay, well, it looks like that is it. Thank you all for your participation in this week's call. We'll see you again next Thursday. Same time, we'll send out a RAD blast with the registration information and the topic. Please, again, feel free to send in any ideas for topics you'd like to hear about, and we'll see if we can cover them. Until then, have a wonderful weekend, and take care.